Numerous ghost spots around Japan are famous for their use of hitobashira, or human pillars. This practice sees a live human being buried in the walls of something undergoing construction to ensure its successful completion. Perhaps the most famous of all these sites is Jomon Tunnel in Hokkaido. The tunnel with people said to be buried within its walls. Jomon Tunnel was so named for the ridge it cuts through, and it's part of the JR Hokkaido line in Kitami City, Hokkaido, and it's quite an old station. Construction began in 1912 and finished 2 years later, in 1914. It can be found roughly 350 meters above sea level, and it runs just over 500 meters in length through Jomon Ridge. Even now, it's located seemingly in the middle of nowhere, and the stories of its construction are horrifically cruel, making it one of the most dangerous ghost spots in all of Japan, even today. Much of this cruel history comes from the conditions the workers were forced to build it under. Jomon Tunnel was built by tako labourers. These tako labourers were, in essence, slaves or prisoners. Even now, Hokkaido is a cold, harsh, and unforgiving place, but back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was even more so. Tako labourers were first sent to Hokkaido in 1887. These prisoners were sent out to modernize the vast, untouched areas of Hokkaido, building roads and railways to connect the then far-flung cities and villages on the island. Much of the island was still untouched by what we now call civilization, and these prisoners, or tako labourers, were tasked with bringing the island up to speed. The conditions in Hokkaido were horrendously cold, and many considered the practice inhumane, even for prisoners. Officially, the use of tako labourers was ended in 1894, but in reality, the practice continued. When it came time to build the Jomon Tunnel, these men were again sent out into what would become a horrifically difficult construction project high in the Hokkaido mountains. Even now, this would be a difficult prospect, so you can imagine what it was like for slaves in all but name in the early 1900s. These labourers were forced to live in small wooden bungalows called tako rooms that housed 70 men at a time. These tako rooms had a single sliding door with a bell attached to alert camp leaders if someone tried to leave during the night. This door could also be locked from the outside if the leader deemed it necessary. These rooms received almost no light, very little ventilation, and had tiny slits for windows. And, to further divide the men, the tako labourers were further split up into 3 groups for dining: upper class dining, middle class dining, and lower class dining. The upper class men could eat with the boss in a separate room come mealtime. The middle class were allowed a bench to sit on during meals, but the lower class, the largest class, saw men forced to stand when eating. Much like prisoners, the tako labourers could, and often were, accused of anything the boss saw fit to accuse them with. They were often assaulted for no reason, falsely imprisoned, exploited, and oppressed. And it was under these horrific conditions that they were forced to build Jomon Tunnel. The men were forced into 15-hour workdays without break. Tunnel building was already back-breaking work, but the men had to contend with the harsh Hokkaido winters and survive on only 2 meagre meals of rice with miso soup a day. Numerous men died of malnutrition, and by the time the tunnel was completed in 1914, over 100 tako labourers had died. Many of them fell victim to bedi-bedi, a chronic form of thiamine deficiency, thanks to their unsustainable diets. Even when these men literally collapsed on the job, they were not given the medical care they needed. On the contrary, they found themselves subjected to corporal punishment, and the bodies were tossed into a mass grave in the forest just outside the tunnel walls. It's said that locals who entered the area to gather edible plants accidentally stumbled upon their mass grave and collected the bones themselves to give them a proper burial. On top of this, men who tried to escape fared no better. Once caught, they would be brutally assaulted, and in some cases, stripped naked, tied to a tree, and then lynched. If they died, they would then be tossed into a pile with the other dead bodies. If they lived, they were sent back to work. The troubles didn't end there. Once Jomon Tunnel opened for business, all sorts of reports made their way out of the strange happenings inside its walls. One engineer reportedly saw a man standing inside the tunnel one night as he was driving a steam train through it. Blood poured from the man's head. The engineer stopped the train and ran out to check if he was okay. But by the time he got there, the man was gone. Confused, the engineer returned to the train and started it once more. But again, he saw the man with blood pouring from his head on the tracks. Once more, he stopped the train, but the expression on the man's face chilled him to the core. He closed his eyes and waited for the train to come to a stop, but soon realized another train was quickly approaching from behind. He got out and told the other driver of what he'd seen. The driver, noticing how terrified he looked, agreed to switch places with him and drive his train safely out of the tunnel, while he followed behind in his. These strange occurrences weren't limited to inside the tunnel, however, nor were they limited to drivers. Passengers often reported hearing moans and coughing sounds, like someone choking, upon nearing the tunnel. Station attendants at Jomon Station also suffered from mysterious illnesses that even extended to their families, and they often went mad. One station attendant's wife reportedly even threw herself in front of a train and died. Of course, it didn't take a genius to put two and two together, and people blamed these strange incidents on the angry spirits that no doubt resided in Jomon Tunnel. People may not have known what really went on during construction, but it wasn't hard to assume that it wasn't pleasant. In 1959, a Jizo statue was erected roughly 1 kilometer from the tunnel, dedicated to those who had died during its construction. The skeletons of roughly 50 railway workers and their family members had been discovered in this same area. Then, in 1968, the unthinkable happened. The Tokachi Earthquake hit Hokkaido with a magnitude of 7.9 on the Richter scale. This damaged the Jomon Tunnel walls and, in 1970, workers set out to finally repair them. It was here that a grisly discovery was made. Workers found the bones of over 100 men near the entrance of the tunnel and in the woods nearby. The Tako labourers who had died during construction. It was here, nearly 60 years later, that people learnt the real truth behind the tunnel's horrific history. In September of the same year, workers expanding Jomon Station found a skull buried in the gravel roughly 60 centimeters from the brick wall near the exit. There had long been rumors of human pillars used at Jomon Tunnel, and this seemed to confirm it. One station attendant reportedly said, "There's a good chance there are more around here," and claimed that the human pillars were common knowledge in the area. And just like the man said, more skeletons were found standing up inside the walls of Jomon Tunnel during the reconstruction. The state of them and their position suggested the men had been buried alive, not after death. These human pillars, buried alive to ensure the successful completion of Jomon Tunnel, were later moved to the nearby Lubeshibe Public Cemetery for a proper burial. A monument was erected in Lubeshibe City in 1980 to commemorate all the men who had died during the construction of Jomon Tunnel, but it doesn't seem to have done much for their anger. People still report hauntings and strange occurrences around the tunnel today, even though it's barely used anymore. The callous treatment and horrific deaths of the tako labourers who were piled into mass graves and buried in the tunnel walls will never be forgotten, however, and their legacy will no doubt have Jomon Tunnel forever remembered as one of the most dangerous ghost spots in all of Japan. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time.